The sound that changed everything was barely a whisper, metal scraping against metal in the darkness. But in a place like Javari Sector 6, even whispers could kill you. Kalen froze. His scarred fingers still wrapped around the broken terminal he'd been prying apart. In 30 years of survival, he'd learned to trust his ears above all else. The sound came again, soft, careful, human. Someone was watching him, the dead. Javari Sector 6 didn't exist on any map that normal people could buy. It was a ghost. Zone floating in the cold vacuum above a lifeless moon filled with the bones of dead ships and broken dreams. The official records called it a restricted salvage area. Everyone else just called it hell. For decades, this place had been a dumping ground. Destroyed cargo ships, melted mining equipment, and twisted metal from old wars, all of it thrown here to rot under thick gray clouds that never cleared. The hallways were dark because the lights had died years ago. The air machines coughed and wheezed, putting out more poison than clean oxygen. That the only people who still lived here were the ones who had nowhere else to go. The desperate, the forgotten, the already dead who just hadn't stopped breathing yet. Kalen Holt wasn't one of them. He was 42 years old, with deep scars cutting across his weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't live in this nightmare. He just visited it every 2 weeks, like a man visiting his own grave. He would travel from the safer outer ring stations, crossing the dangerous space between worlds to search through the wreckage. He pulled out useful parts, computer chips, power cells, water filters, anything he could trade for food and survival. He kept his heavy coat zipped tight, his head down, and his pulse rifle hanging low where everyone could see it. The scars on his face were like a warning sign. Don't talk to me. And the fact that he liked it that way kept both him and everyone else alive. He didn't believe in helping people for free. Didn't believe in luck, okay? And he definitely wasn't looking to rescue anyone. At least that's what he told himself every morning when he woke up alone. The acid rain, the rain in Sector 6. Wasn't really rain, it was acid mixed with chemicals that ate through skin if you weren't careful. It didn't fall down like normal water. Instead, it clung to everything: metal pipes, electrical wires, and human flesh. Then it slowly burned through whatever it touched. Kalen moved carefully through the dark corridor beneath what used to be a medical clinic. His breathing mask covered the lower half of his face, and his thermal hood was pulled up to protect his head. The building had been stripped clean years ago, but he knew that sometimes the thieves missed things. Small items hidden inside walls or buried under piles of trash. Medical places were especially good for finding valuable electronics. The old slave traders and black market doctors who used to work here had expensive equipment. Sometimes they left behind ID chips, biosensors, or power units that were worth real money. He was carefully taking apart a collapsed computer terminal when he heard that soft, metallic scraping sound. It wasn't the random noise of settling debris. It wasn't machinery. It was something alive, trying to be quiet. His hand moved slowly toward his weapon as he turned around. The discovery behind a fallen cargo container, half hidden under a sheet of silver thermal foil. Something small was crouched in the shadows. At first, Kalen thought it might be an animal, some kind of scavenger creature that lived in the ruins. But then he saw the shape more clearly. It was a child. She sat perfectly still, watching him with large, bright blue eyes. Her skin had a pale blue tint that marked her as one of the genetic hybrids, part human, part something else. Her silver hair hung down like a curtain around her face and arms, long and tangled from not being washed. She wasn't holding any weapons. Her small feet were bare and dirty. She looked like she hadn't eaten a real meal in weeks. Her knees were pulled up against her chest, and her thin arms clutched something against her body, a piece of old rescue blanket, torn and stained. She couldn't have been older than 5 years. Kalen's muscles tensed immediately. His eyes swept the area around them, looking for signs of danger. No traps, no fresh blood on the floor, no movement in the shadows above. He knew that slave traders Didn't usually leave children behind unless they were dying or unless it was some kind of setup. He lowered his voice to a whisper. You alone, kid? The girl didn't move. She didn't even blink. She just stared at him with those big blue eyes like she was trying to figure out if he was going to hurt her or help her. Then, in a voice that sounded like she hadn't spoken to anyone, in days she said something that hit him like a punch to the chest. Will you be my father? The question that changed everything. Kalen stood frozen in place. It wasn't just the question that shocked him, it was the way she asked it. Her voice was flat and matter-of-fact, like she was asking for directions or requesting food. Like this was a practical business transaction. Like maybe she'd asked this question before to other people and it hadn't worked out. He took a careful step forward, moving slowly so he wouldn't scare her. What's your name, little one? She said quietly. Are you hurt, Yali? She shook her head once, but the movement was slow and tired, like she was trying to save her energy. Her lips were cracked and dry. Her eyes had the glassy look of someone who hadn't had enough water to drink. Kalen dropped down into a crouch, making himself smaller and less threatening. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sealed protein. Very emergency food that tasted like cardboard but would keep you alive. He held it out to her. Yali stared at the food for several long seconds, like she couldn't believe it was real. Then she reached out with one small hand and took it. She bit off a piece and swallowed it without chewing much, the way very hungry people eat. Where's your mother? Colleen asked gently. Yali's fingers tightened around the dirty blanket she was holding. Taken, she said. 3 nights ago, I think. I didn't count. She paused, then continued in that same flat, practiced voice. Men with lights came. They put a collar on her. She screamed. Then she stopped. Kalen let out a slow breath, smiled, started working through the possibilities. There were rumors about Zone 9 underground holding cells, research laboratories, genetic harvesters who stole people for illegal experiments. You didn't go there unless you had backup or unless you had nothing left to lose. Yali spoke again, her voice even quieter now. She said to stay quiet. I did. They didn't find me. The choice Galen's instincts were pulling him in 2 different directions, like he was being torn apart. One part of him, the part that had kept him alive for so many years, said, walk away. This isn't your fight. You don't have the weapons or the money to start a war with the slave traders. This kid will just get you killed. But the other part of him, the part that still remembered what it felt like to lose someone you cared about, wouldn't let him move. You couldn't just leave her here to die. He ran a hand down his scarred face, feeling tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Yali, he said, his voice quiet and gentle. Are you cold? She nodded. He reached out and started to take off his outer thermal layer, the thick, insulated jacket that kept the acid rain and cold vacuum from killing him. As he wrapped it around her small shoulders, her entire body flinched at first contact. But when she realized he wasn't going to hurt her, she leaned into the warmth without saying a word. You can come with me, he said. I've got shelter, food, a bed. We'll figure out the rest later. She didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped just slightly. Like some of the tension was leaving her body as they started walking through the dark corridors. She reached out and grabbed the edge of his coat, holding, unlike she was anchoring herself to something real and solid. Where do you live? She asked as they walked. Temporary quarters, just a relay shed, but it's sealed. You'll be safe. After a pause, she said something unexpected. You don't smell bad. Kalen looked down at her, surprised. Thanks, she shrugged her small shoulders. Most men smell like chemicals or blood. And what do I smell like? Old stuff, and a little bit of metal. I get that a lot, Kalen said, and he almost smiled. The shelter the shed was built like a small fortress, was reinforced on 3 sides, with pieces of scrap armor plating and lined with low-powered heating coils that kept the worst of the cold away. Kalen punched in the code for the magnetic lock and let Yali step inside first. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood in the doorway, her eyes scanning every corner of the small space. It was the behavior of an animal checking for predators, or a person who had learned the hard way that safety was never guaranteed. She only moved forward once she was absolutely sure there was no one else hiding inside. Kaylin heated up a soup ration in the wall unit and poured it into a thermal bowl. Yali held it with both hands like it was something sacred, something precious, that might disappear if she wasn't careful. He sat nearby, watching as she ate. She didn't ask for more food. She didn't speak at all until she had finished every last drop. Then she looked up at him with those bright blue eyes and asked, "Will they find us here?" "Not here," Kaylin said. Promise. Kaylin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "No, I can't promise that. But I'll keep you safe." Yali curled up on the small cot, still hugging the same shredded piece of blanket she'd been carrying when he found her. "You don't lie like the others," she said. "I'm not like the others." She thought about that for a while, then asked, "Were you a father before?" "No," Kaylin said honestly. "Then how do you know how to do it?" Kaylin leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. "I don't." There was a pause. Then Yali said, "It's okay. I'm good at pretending." She didn't cry. She just lay there until her eyes closed. And even after she fell asleep, her small hand stayed curled in the fabric of his coat, just tight enough to make sure he didn't disappear while she wasn't watching. The next morning, Kaylin woke up before Yali did. He had spent the night on the cold floor, his back against the insulated wall, his eyes half open in the dim amber glow of the emergency lighting strips that ran along the ceiling. Outside, the wind rattled the metal plates of the relay shed, but inside, the heater coil buzzed quietly, working just hard enough to fight off the killing cold. He looked over at the cot. Yali hadn't moved much during the night. Her knees were still tucked up to her chest, her arms wrapped around that same dirty strip of blanket she'd arrived with. Her silver hair was spread across the pillow, tangled and unwashed, but her breathing was steady and even, no flinching, no talking in her sleep. She hadn't stirred once. Kaylin eased himself to his feet, his joints cracking from the cold and his ribs aching from lying on the hard floor for too long. But he moved carefully, partly to avoid waking her, but mostly because part of him didn't want to face what came next. He hadn't planned on taking in a child, especially not a hybrid child who was connected to Zone 9 or any of the underground networks linked to the illegal genetic breeding programs. That was the kind of thing that got you hunted down, silenced, and dumped outside the dome where the air couldn't support human life. But when she had looked at him and asked him to be her father, something had shifted inside him. It wasn't pity, it wasn't guilt, it was something simpler and harder to ignore. She was real, she was alive, she was still here. The search begins. Scalen activated the hidden terminal he kept under a bolted panel near the power generator. The interface buzzed and spit static for several seconds before the screen stabilized. It wasn't connected to any legal communication networks, but it was good enough for accessing dark web feeds, underground message boards, and a few old archive databases he hadn't deleted yet. He ran a search query, typing in keywords: Zone 9, genetic breeding programs, underground trade routes, containment facilities. The results were fragments of information, old maps with missing sections, broken links to deleted files, and a single recent photograph from 6 weeks ago. The image was blurry and poorly lit, showing a group of people being marched in chains beneath a half-broken sign that read Jankor Reclamation, Private Access Only. The building was located in the dead zone of Sector 9, right above the old maintenance drain systems. Kaylin stared at the photograph, then enlarged it and zoomed in. One of the women in the group wore a collar with a faint violet glow around the clasp. She was barefoot, her hair covering half her face, and her skin had the same pale blue tint as Yali's. He couldn't be completely sure, but the shape of her eyes, even blurred in the poor quality image, looked very much like Yali's. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of movement. Yali sat up on the cot, her hair hanging forward like a curtain. She rubbed her eyes with the back of one hand and looked around the small room before her gaze settled on him. "You're still here," she said, and there was surprise in her voice. "Yeah," Kaylin replied. "I told you I would be." She slid off the cot and walked toward him in slow, deliberate steps. She was still barefoot, and Kaylin noticed that her knees were marked with faint, bruised, small circles of discoloration just under the skin. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She nodded once. He handed her a sealed nutrition pack and watched her peel it open with quiet efficiency. She didn't speak again until she had eaten half of it. "Did you find her?" she asked, her voice soft. "I might." "Have," Kaylin said. "I'm not sure yet, but I have a place to start looking." Yali didn't smile, but her grip on the food pack loosened. Like something inside her had relaxed slightly. The collar Kaylin squatted down to her eye level. "You said your mother wore a collar." Yali nodded. "It made her bleed when she cried." Sentence hung heavy in the air between them. Kaylin didn't push for more details. "Do you remember the names of the men who took her?" Yali hesitated, then whispered, "One had a coat with a white circle and a name. Merrick's number, or something like that?" Kaylin's face tightened. Merrick's Holdings, an old biotech company that served as a front for slave traders to hide illegal crossbreeding experiments. Officially, the company had been shut down years ago. Unofficially, it was still active under secret contracts. "You been to Zone 9 before?" he asked. "Just the edge," Yali said. "I wasn't supposed to look, but sometimes the doors were open. They didn't watch me much." "You lived near there?" "Behind the clinic, with her in a small room. She didn't let people see me." Kaylin leaned back, processing this information. So Yali's mother had tried to keep her hidden from the outside world. That explained why Yali hadn't been taken along with her mother. But it didn't explain how they had survived in that dangerous area for so long. "Do you know why they took her?" Kalan asked gently. Yali stared down at the floor for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice too clinical for a child, "She could still make babies." It wasn't the way a 5-year-old should know that word or use it. It was cold and memorized, like she had overheard it during a business transaction or been told it by someone who didn't care what it meant. Kaylin's stomach turned. He stood up and walked to the equipment locker. "All right," he said. "If we're going into Zone 9, we need supplies. Cloaks, food rations, mask filters, thermal blockers." Yali tilted her head. "Are we going now?" "Tonight. It's quieter after the shift changes." She nodded like that made perfect sense to her. As he gathered gear from a locked panel near the back of the shelter, she spoke again. "Do people always take mothers away?" Kaylin paused in his packing. "No," he said, "but bad people do." "Are you bad?" He turned to look at her. "Not anymore." She didn't ask what that meant. Preparing for the mission, Kaylin packed a second blanket, a child-sized breathing mask, and a tracker jammer he hadn't used in years. Then he tossed her a folded hood. "Put this on. We'll blend in better when we move." Yali pulled the hood over her head without protest. The fabric was too big for her small frame, but her bright blue eyes peeked out from beneath it, sharp and focused. "You don't talk much," she said suddenly. Kaylin grunted. "Neither do you. I'm little." He nodded. "So am I." Yali blinked, confused. "You're big." "Not where it matters." She looked at him for a moment, trying to understand what he meant. Then she giggled a small, quick sound that was over before it really started. Like she was still learning how to laugh again. They left the shelter just after dusk. The streets were quieter during shift transitions, only scrap runners high on combat stimulants, hired mercenaries, and the occasional slaver patrol moving through the upper ventilation levels. Kaylin kept them close to the walls, moving between alley heat ducts and old sensor blind spots that he had memorized over years of scavenging. The path toward Zone 9 wound steadily downward through rusted stairwells, broken elevators, and cracked floor. Grates where coolant fluid hissed out like poisonous breath. Yali didn't speak during the journey, but she kept her small hand wrapped around the corner of his coat, always touching, always anchored to him. By the time they reached the upper access tunnel to Zone 9, Kaylin's internal navigation system had synced with the coordinates he'd pulled from the archived photograph. The data lined up with the Core reclamation facility. They were close. He crouched behind a collapsed cargo hauler, checking the automated drone patrol routes across the narrow corridor ahead. The security lights flashed white in regular intervals. 8 seconds on, 4 seconds off. "We go on the second flicker," he whispered to Yali. She didn't reply with words, just nodded and prepared to follow. When they ran quiet, fast, low to the ground, Kaylin realized something important. Yali didn't stumble, not even once. This little girl had survived this long not because of luck, but because she had already learned how to be invisible, how to move without being seen. They made it to the service access hatch just as the lights reset their cycle. From there, Kaylin would need to splice into a dead communication line and manually override the door controls. It would take time, and it would make noise. He turned. "To Yali, this part's going to be loud. You'll need to hide." She nodded, then whispered, "What if something happens to you?" "It won't," he said. "But what if it does?" Kaylin looked into her bright blue eyes and saw something there that reminded him of himself at her age, the knowledge that the people you depend on can disappear without warning. "Then you run," he said quietly. "You go back the way we came. And you survive, just like you did before I found you." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't want to be alone again." "You won't be," Kaylin promised. "I'm not going anywhere." And as he began working on the door controls, he realized that for the first time in many years, he actually meant it. "Will she know me?" He hesitated. "Yeah, she will. Even if I look different now, she'll know." Yali hugged herself. "Good." As Kaylin pulled out his tools, Yali sat behind Febelked knees, hugged, tight eyes, watching the door that might lead to her mother. He thought he'd have more time to prepare her, but deep down, he knew once they opened that door there was no going back, only forward to whatever waited on the other side. The hatch resisted at first. The lock was old, but still active low-voltage biometric. With a magnetic override, Callan wedged his boot against the base of the frame and held the splicing tool steady with one hand, sweat beginning to bead along his brow despite the cold. His gauntlet hummed as heralded the current into the access panel, forcing it to reset a few meters behind him. Yali crouched in the alcove, arms wrapped tight around her knees. She hadn't moved or spoken in over 5 minutes, but she was watching, always. Watinklan muttered under his breath, "Come on, come on." The override light blinked. Heeks hauled once low and sharp. The door hissed and began to slide open, only a fraction at first, just enough to feel the change in air. Drier, recycled artificial. He turned his head, stayed close, and stay behind me. "Yay, got." Up, slowly adjusting the oversized hood, she moved without sound. They stepped inside. Corridor beyond was a narrow maintenance tunnel with exposed cabling along the ceiling and old fluid stains down the walls. Low-pressure steam hissed from a broken valve, filling the space with a metallic temps. The lights were intermittent. Only a few wall strips still flickered, giving the passage azically white-green hue. No alarms, no movement, yet Kaylin moved forward with own hand on his pulse weapon and the other checking corners. Each door they passed was locked or welded shut, holding Chambers Labs. The names had long since peeled off the plaques, but some still bore the faded imprint of Janker Reclamation's logo, half a double. Helix stylized into a corporate spiral. This place wasn't just forgotten, it had been erased. You followed without speaking, but Ken noticed how her steps slowed the farther they went in her hands. Curled tighter into the sides of his coat, her breathing got shallower. She remembered. "This place, tell me if we get close," he whispered. She nodded. Eyes wide, they turned a corner and reached a larger chamber, low-ceiling glass partitions on both sides. Inside, the pods were mostly empty metal stretchers with restraints monitoring equipment. Off Lenore, blinking red, one containment pod was still lit, faint blue glow emanating from its walls. Frosted glass. Something was inside. Kaylin approached. Slowly, gun lowered, hand raised. Yali stopped 10 feet back. He wiped the glass with his sleeve. Inside, curled against the far corner, was a woman. Her body was thin, covered on Libby, a torn fertility. Smock transparent, one strap broken, her skin was cold, bluey a few shades lighter than Crind. And we spoke a few shades lighter than Yali's. Her black hair was long tangled and stuck to her back with sweat. A faint pulsometer was still active on the base of her collar, her knees were drawn up. Her arms hugged them close. She didn't look up. Kaelin reached for the manual control beside the glass. The interface was damaged, but he could bypass the circuitive. The woman flinched violently, eyes wide reflexive. He stopped, her gaze locked on his sharp. Alert but panicked, she didn't recognize him. She shrank further into the corner, trembling. The collar on her neck glowed, briefly reacting to her vitals behind. Yali's voice broke the silence. Mommy. It wasn't loud, barely a whisper, but it cut through Vave. The woman jerked toward the sound. Her eyes shifted, locked onto the small shape standing behind the man. She blinked once, disbelief. Then again, Yali. She croaked. Kaelin stepped aside. Yali didn't run, she walked. Cautious, unsure, like she didn't trust the moment to be real, she reached the glass and pressed both palms to it. The woman, Ryan, lifted a trembling hand and mirrored the gesture. Kaelin crouched. At the control panel, the manual override was half burned, but he saw the secondary fuse routing was intact. He'd need to redirect power from the wall strip, twist the contacts, fadate a false clearance code, and hope it didn't trigger a secondary lockdown. He worked quickly behind him. Yali whispered, "Is she sick?" "No," Kaelin said, "just weak. Can we take her out now?" "I'm trying." He took 2 attempts. The first sparked, the second locked the panel, then released. Glass cracked with a loud hiss. The seal broke, pressure equalized, re-ended it. "Move right away." She stared at the open door like it was a trick. Then slowly she crawled forward. Her limbs hook, her bare feet slipped on the floor as she tried to stand. Kaelin stepped in and caught her before she collapsed. She tensed against his touch, hard. He expected resistance, fighting, kicking, panic. Instead, she froze, muscles tight, shoulders up, breath caught in her throat. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "Yali's safe. She found me." Ryan's voice, washer zero. She survived. She did. He helped her out of the pod. She could barely stand. Her legs were too weak. Her back was covered in faint circular marks, needle ports, implant scars, and one swollen bruise near the base of her spine. The collar on her neck blinkadance, then powered down fully. Battery failure, maybe, or deactivation. When Thelok disengaged, Yali reached for her mother's hand. Ryan looked down, ice glassy. She touched Yali's cheek with 2 fingers. Then she broke. Her body collapsed to her knees, arms pulling Yali against her. No tears. She was too dry forth at just the sound of shallow breathing and the desperate grip of a woman who'd been locked away too long. Kaelin knelt beside them. He reached into his satchel and pulled out his spare thermal shirt. Ryan's smock was barely covering her, and the air in the corridor was cold. He wrapped the shirt around her shoulders. She flinched again, but this time she didn't pull away. "I'll get you both out," he said. "I have a path back." Ryan looked up at him, still trembling. "Who are you?" "Names." "Kaelin, I don't matter." "Yali, came to find you." Her voice cracked. "Why would you help?" Kaelin stood, scanned the hallway. No signs of movement yet, because no one else did. Yali was holding our mother's hand now. Her eyes were sharp, focused. "She said you'd come," she whispered. Kaelin checked the corridor again. Time was running out. Someone would have noticed the power dip or the breach. He knelt beside Ryan. "Can you walk?" "E thinks so good, 'cause we move." Now he took her other arm. She didn't resist this time. As they made their way back through the tunnels, Yali ahead, small and fast, leading them by memory. Ryan stumbled twice, but didn't stop. Her grip on Kaelin's sleeve tightened each time. Her eyes darted at every shadow, but she didn't let go. Halfway to the surface, they heard the first drone ping echo down the steel corridors. Yali turned, eyes wide. "They're coming." Ken's voice dropped low. "Keep moving, don't stop." He dropped a tracking disruptor behind Thimmet. Wouldn't stop pursuit, but it would by time as they climbed through a broken maintenance shaft into the cooling ducts of Sector 6. Rayon's breathing turned ragged. Her steps faltered. Kaelin lifted her with hesitation. She said nothing, didn't argue, didn't flinch. By the time they reached the surface, Level the first warning alarms were sounding, security teams converging below, but they were already gone back inside the relay shed. Kaylin sealed the hatch and locked down the power draw. The girl collapsed onto Theket, curling against the far wall. Her mother lay beside her, shivering. Callan handed her water and more blankets. Ryan looked at him with a mix of fear, exhaustion, and something else. Confusion. You didn't have to help us, she said. No. Then why? Callan paused, then answered. Because, she called. Me father and I didn't want to disappoint her. Ryan blinked once, didn't reply. But when Hess stepped away, she reached out. Just for a second, and let her hand rest on his note as a plea. But as thanks, the storm rolled in just after dusk, the air outside. There lay shed turned thick with static and chemical dust sweeping against the sealed panels like dry surf against Abercon Hull. The generators cuked into low cycle and the lights dimmed as power redirected to the thermal coils inside. The silence was broken only by shallow breathing, the quiet hum of recycled air, and the occasional groan of the wind. Hitting steel, Kaylin sat across the room, leaning against the wall near the tool rack. His rifle was disassembled on a metal crate in front of him, half-cleaned, half-forgotten. His hands were idle. His thoughts weren't. Ryan hadn't spoken since they got back. She'd taken the water, the blanket, and the spare thermal shirt. She hadn't argued, but she hadn't thanked him again either. Not that he expected it. She lay on the cot, now curled beside Yali, both wrapped in layered fabric. Her eyes were open, but unfocused. She was watching the ceiling. Maybe something past it trauma did that, fractured attention. Broken time. She looked like someone waiting to be punished for surviving. Yali had fallen asleep with her mother's hair clutched in one hand. Callan watched them in silence. The girl hadn't spoken since they returned, not even in sleep, sheckling to her mother like she might vanish again if she let go. He sighed, stood across the room, kneeling. Bezadeth. Cat, he kept his voice low. You need food. I've got something warm. Ryan's eyes flicked toward him, cautious. She hesitated, then nodded. He took it as permission. The synth meal was bland but nourishing. Stewed protein blocks in nutrient broth. He heated 2 portions, gave one to her, handed the other to Yali. When she stirred, the child blinked sleepily. It smells like the station canteen. You remember that? Callan asked. I remember everything, she murmured. Ryan shifted, looking at her daughter. She always did, even when I tried to keep her out of things. Callan sat on a crate across from them, not close, not far, just where she could see him. She wanted. I need to know what they did to you, he said gently. Anything that might come back to bite us. Tag trackers, implants. If there's a trace on you, they'll use it. Ryan didn't answer right away. She set the food aside, untouched. Her hands trembled slightly. There was a subermal implant near my spine. It monitored hormonal cycles. She looked down at her collarbone and a tracker in the collar, but it failed. 2 days before you found me, they were going to replace it. I think they got distracted with another subject. You're sure it's dead? They wouldn't have left me if it wasn't. Ken nodded. Any medical signs I should be watching for? Ryan hesitated again. Day. Injected hormonalidifiers. I don't know the strain. It made me bleed more weak. Dizzy. I stopped keeping track of time. There was a tremor ere she raised her hand palms, shaking slightly. How long were you there since Yali was taken away? I don't know. How long? She was 3. Kaylin looked at Yali. That was 2 years ago. The girl nodded. Almost 3. I counted on my fingers for a while, then I stopped. A long silence followed. Ryan finally took a bite of the stew, chewed, slowly swallowed, then with faintest voice she said, I was supposed to be sold. They said I was still viable, but then the bids didn't come in. Callan stiffened. So they locked you in storage. She nodded. To keep 'em clean for whoever might change their mind. Ye leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. I wanted to scream at them, but I was too little. You did good, Ken, said gently. You stayed quiet. You survived. Ryan's jaw tensed. She shouldn't have had to. He didn't argue. He stood instead, moved to the back cabinet, pulled out a new thermal blanket and a jar of antiseptic gel. Let me check your wounds, he said. We don't know what's under the bruises. Ryan's posture stiffened. Kellen noticed and stopped. You don't have to strip, just the arms, legs, if you're comfortable. She hesitated, then nodded once. Slowly, he knelt in front of her, keeping his movements measured. She peeled the sleeve of the thermal shirt back, exposing skin marked by long pale scars, some surgical, some. Not her wrist had a faint burn ring from a restraint. He dabbed gel onto a clean cloth and began wiping. Gently, she didn't flinch, but her breath caught once when he reached. A spot near her elbow. You've had worse, he murmured. She nodded, but then said, "It's not the pain that scares me. It's what happens after when someone says they're being kind." He paused and said simply, "I don't want anything from you." Her voice was very audible. "I don't know how to believe that yet." "That's okay," he finished with her arms. Then glanced down legs. She nodded again, more confidently, this time slowly lifted the edge of the blanket enough to show the bruising on her thighs. He worked without commentary, efficient but gentle. When he was done, he set the cloth aside and stood. "You'll need rest," he said. "We'll stay here for a few days. I've got rations and backup power. No one knows where you are." She looked up at him, eyes still cautious. "Why are you doing this?" "Because Yali asked me to. You don't even know me. I don't need to." Another long silence. Then finally, Ryan said, "What if I can't be what she wants anymore?" Callan looked between them. "She doesn't need anything except you alive." He turned to check the power console. As he moved, Yali whispered something to her mother. Quiet, hesitant. "He stays near Theodore when I sleep. I think it's so. No one can take me." Ryan looked at Ken again, and this time didn't just see a stranger. She saw a man who had already risked everything to bring her back that night. Ken sat near door again, rifled beside him, watching the entry panel, and this time when Ryan lay down beside. Yay, she didn't face away. She faced him the next morning. The storm had passed, but the air inside the relay shed still felt heavy. Kalen moved, quietly heating water over the generator coil. His movements were deliberate, steady, part habit, part effort not to disturb the quiet that had settled over the space since last night's escape. The hum of the recycler and the occasional groan of the outer plates were the only sounds behind him on the cot. Ryan sat upright with her legs crossed beneath her. Her long black hair was tangled but dry. The thermal shirt she wore hung low on one shoulder, covering just enough to preserve dignity, but nothing of the vulnerability in her posture. She'd accepted the warmth, but her spine remained straight, as if waiting for something to go wrong. Yali was asleep, rolled near her mother's side, one small arm across Ryan's stomach. Her breathing was slow and soft. Kalen glanced back and then placed 2 cups of warm liquid hydration broth on the crate beside them. Sat a few paces away. "I'll need to make a supply run tonight," he said. "Could take a few hours. I'll leave Therafil and doorlock code with you." Ryan looked at him with faint surprise. "You'd leave us alone?" "I'd rather not, Hesed, but I don't have a choice. You'll be safe. No one knows you're here." She nodded, slowly looking down into the cup. Steam curled off the surface. She didn't drink. A long pause passed before she spoke again. "Do you want to know what happened to me?" Ken didn't move. "Only if you want to tell me." Another paused. Then she said, "Yali's father was a soldier, Virilin military caste, frontline genetics unit. We were matched under a reproduction contract." She kept her eyes on the cup. "I was selected for him based on viability markers. Emotional suppression, hormonal compatibility, cycle predictability. They didn't ask if I wanted it." Callan listened to interrupt. He wasn't cruel at first, just cold, efficient, like I was part of a task he needed to finish. Her fingers tightened on the rim of the cup. "When I miscarried our first child, hadn't speak to me for 3 days. When I conceived again, he treated me like a piece of equipment, said my body wasn't symmetrical enough, that my design was flawed." She finally looked up. "I was never his mate. I was an assignment, a tool when he got promotion clearance. He also offered a transfer bonus if he surrendered his reproductive bond. They gave him a choice. Keep me or cash me out." Kun's jaw set. He chose the payout. She said, "Turn me over to Gen Core representatives." Kelly was 4? They said she was too young to enter the CAS program, that she'd be a liability. In that trade, he told them to do whatever they wanted with us. Then he left. She exhaled, long silent. "I don't even remember what I screamed. I just remember the lightning red when the collar activated." Yali stirred. faintly beside her but didn't wake. Rayan stared at her daughter's sleeping form. I thought she died. I thought I lost her for good. She served Kaylin, said she found me. She led me back to you. Ryan's expression flicked, then settled into something quieter grief. Without collapse, she drank from the cup slowly. When she lowered it, she spoke again. I'm not good at words or trust. I don't know how to be anything but what they trained me to be. You don't have to be anything, Callan said. Not for me. She looked at him directly this time. Her gaze held longer than before. You stayed even after you saw what they did. I saw someone who shouldn't have been left behind. Her eyes didn't leave. His then softly, you fixed its collar before you touched me. That's not something you fix by touching silence then. I'm not used to being Saphir. A man. Callan nodded once, then we'll take it slow. Ryan glanced down at her arm. The bruises were fading. Her hands were steadier. Do you want me to sleep near the door again, he asked. She shook her head. Tonight. She said, voice quiet. Sit closer. Callan didn't answer. He didn't smile. He just moved his crat across the floor and sat beside the cot. She didn't reach for him, didn't lean in, but her shoulder worn beneath. The frayed edge of his coat stayed close to his and didn't pull away. They heard the first sign just past midnight, a faint pulse in the distance, low frequency rhythmic. Not mechanical, not natural. Kayla knew the sound too well. It was a drone. Scanned slow sweeping arcs through lower sector 6, likely tracing residual energy. Signatures, someone was looking for them. He shut off the heat coil and pulled the blackout panel over the ski light. The shed fell into stillness, lit only by the red emergency diode north door lock. Ryan was already on her feet. She didn't ask what. It was her posture changed immediately, still weak bet focused. Alert, Yali woke to the tension in the air and blinked at her mother, then at Callan. Bad people again. She asked softly. Ken nodded once. Might be. Yali crawled off the cot and wrapped herself in the coat Callan had given her 2 nights ago. She didn't critidant whimper. She walked to her mother and held her hand like it was routine. Take this, Callan said, tossing a jamming strip to Ryan. Put it in your sleeve. If they scan for biometric trocisitile, short the feed. Ryan caught it and tucked it under the thermal fabric. We can't stay here. She said no, Callan replied. I've got a secondary exit maintenance crawl. Tunnel about half a kilometer down, unstable but off the grid. We'll need to move fast. He didn't need to ask if she could handle it. Ryan was already pulling supplies into the pack. Water rations, power cells. Her movements were sharper. Now focused, like the pain had dulled under pressure. They excited through the floor, grate dropping into a drainage passage that Ken hadn't used in years. The air was stale, damp, filled with a stench of stagnant coolant and fungal rot. But it was shielded off red. As they crawled, Ken glanced behind him. Often Ryan kept Yali between them, one hand always on the girls. Back when the tunnel narrowed, she whispered calm instructions to her daughter. No fear. Just direct, controlled guidance. It reminded Kaylin of a soldier, not one trained to fight, but one trained to endure. By the time they emerged onto a lower tram platform, Sector 7 was visibline, the distance barely functioning, half abandoned but far enough outside. The Serge grid to buy time, Kaylin led them across a debris field into a condemned utility junction. Buried under collapside transit beams, he'd used the space once as a fallback shelter years ago. Didn't think he'd ever return inside. Ryan sat on the cold floor and exhaled slowly, not from exhaustion, from relief. We're out for now. Yali curled beside her, already half asleep. Callan checked that signal. Repeater at the edge of the chamber. Dead good. She's not afraid of. Dark, Renan said quietly. Callan turned. You taught her that. I told her dark was safer than light. She paused. She believed me. You were right. Rion's sighs lingered on Yali's face. She still calls me Mama. I was afraid she wouldn't top. Callan said. Ryan nodded, then stood and walked over to where he sat near the wall, one hand resting on the old storage case he'd used as a chair. She didn't speak. Right away. Then I still don't know how to say things that matter. Ken looked up at her. You don't have to say them, but I want to, she said, stepping closer, because every time I look at her, I think A should have died, and then I remember I didn't because of you. He started toss-peak, but she knelt in front of him. "I'm still afraid," she said, "of being seen off, being touched." Callan's voice was low. "Then I won't touch you." "But I want to be touched," she whispered, "by someone who won't take anything." He watched her carefully. "No one ever escaped what I wanted. Not once, not before the collars, not during the breeding years net. Even when I was sold," her hands were shaking slightly. But she reached forward slowly and placed one hand on his chest, just above his heart. "Right now, I want to be close, to feel someone beside me, not Bacchus. I have to." He didn't move for several seconds, then gently he covered her hand with his own. Her eyes didn't look away. He stood, brought her with him, and led her to the far corner of the room where an old thermal blanket was laid out over crates. Not a bed, but enough for rest. Schley sat first. He sat beside her. Their shoulders touched. Ryan took his hand and placed it over her ribs, where one scar still marked the injection site. She looked into his eyes. "I'm tired of being just a body." "You're not," he said. "You're Ryan. You're a mother. You're here." She pressed her forehead to his. "Then stay here tonight." Just like this, he did that night. Rapidine stillness and broken light. They held each other with nothing between them but the knowledge that this time no one was forcing it. And when Yali rolled over in her sleep and murmured, "He's still here, Mama," Ryan smiled against Kohlensulder. 3 days later, the sector grid sweep ended. No new drones, no heat scans, no patrols. Kalen confirmed it himself, sat for 2 hours above the broken tram line, watching the signal noise flatten to background static. Whoever had been looking for them had either given up or decided it wasn't worth the effort. They were free, at least for now, inside the makeshift shelter. The air had warmed slightly. Ken had repurposed a dead fuel cell into a thermal converter just in now to run lights and charge the food processor. The silence was no longer tense, just quiet, natural, like a place where people were learning how to live again. Yali was humming to herself while organizing ration packs into little Roche. Her hair was cleaner now. He'd helped wash it 2 nights ago with water warmed over the converter. Its still tangled butane shone again like silver wire in low light. Ryan sat by the wall, legs folded, dander, her patching a tear in the thermal blanket with scrap fabric. Her movements were focused, careful. She'd stop, eye flinching, when he entered the room. She no longer avoided his eyes, and sometimes, like now, she looked at him first. "Will you really leave the station?" she asked. Callan tightened the straps on his pack. "It's the only way to be sure. Off-grid colony, planetary surface, new ID. I've got the contacts." Ryan's voice lowered. "For all 3 of us." He met her gaze. "For family groups. That's how I registered." Blinked once, not in surprise, but in realization. "And? You're sure?" she asked. "Could you still think I'd walk away?" "I don't know," she said. "I've never had someone stay." Yali looked up from the ration pile. "You're not leaving, right?" "No," Ken said. "Not ever." Ryan's expression shifted. She rose, stepped toward him slowly, and rested a hand against his chest. This time her hand didn't trembling when she looked into his eyes. There was no shame, just quiet strength, a kindred through survival. She called, "You, father, before I called you anything," Shay said. He didn't speak, but now her voice was soft, serious. "I'd like to call you mine." Ken's response was simple. He wrapped one arm around her waist, the other around Yali, who had already climbed into his side, and said, "Then let's go home." They left that night. No announcements, no goodbyes, just a single transport off the orbital platform. 3 forged ID tags and a sealed container off supplies. Kalen handled the logistics. Rien never asked how Yali fell asleep on her lap during the launch when the shuttle dropped into the atmosphere of the colony moon. Viridin, 3 a storm, was weeping across the surface. Wind pushed against the hull, clouds coiled above jagged black rocks, but beneath it all, on a distant ridge, past the blinking beacon towers, was a small homestead unit off Red Quiet. Waiting, they'd start over there. No chains, no collars. Just a man, a woman, and a little girl with long silver hair who had once whispered, "Will you be me, father?" and made it true forever. It had been 73 days since they arrived in Viridon 3. The homestead was small, just a dome roof. Prefab with solar-bonded panels and a sand-sealed outer gate, but it was quiet, and more importantly, it wastes theirs. Outside, wind rustled through dry grass fields, whispering against the Emmettel fence. Ken had installed himself. The twin suns hung low in the afternoon, sky casting long amber shadows. Cross ridgeline in the distance, mist clung to the base of the jagged hills, rolling in like waves, soft and slow inside. The air smelled faintly of boiled roots and clean cloths. The water recycler hissed once, then went still. Yali ran barefoot across the living room, Matt chasing the small cloth puppet Ryan had sewn for her. She squealed when it slipped from her hands and tumbled under the cot, then dove after it with both arms and legs. Her laughter echoed off walls light, real, unguarded. Callan looked up from the floor where he knelt repairing the air intake valve. He smiled without even realizing. "Itchy's getting louder," he said. Ryan stood near the kook plait hair tied up with a cloth ribbon. Ye had insisted was the prettiest thing here. She wore one of Kalen's old linen shirts. Clen, oversized tied athewist, her skin had taken on a healthier tone. Her shoulders no longer curled inward. "She's not afraid to be loud no more," Ryan said. Callan watched her for a moment, watched the way she stirred pot without hurrying, the way she stood barefoot. Without tension, she wasn't flinching, she wasn't waiting for the next blow, she was just living. "Neither are you," Fist said. Ryan turned it, smiling softly. She set the spoon aside, crossed the room, and sat beside him on the floor. For a while they just sat, shoulder toss, shoulder warmth, shared insolence. "Do you remember the first night?" she asked quietly. "Sector 6 rain in ThedX. You wouldn't meet my eyes. You sat by the door. I thought you'd run. I thought you'd take something." Callan didn't reply. He reached over and laced their fingers together. "You never did," she whispered. "You never ran." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes, if forget the collar's gone, that's okay. I still wake up and check if he's breathing." He nodded. "So do I." A pause. "Do you ever think about what happens after this?" she asked. "After what, this safety piece? If someone came, if the past came back?" He exhaled slowly. "Then we move game. If we have to, I'll build another fence. I'll do it 1,000 times. Ryan turned to him, serious now. Her fingers tightened around his. "I wouldn't want to do it without you," she said. "I couldn't." "You won't have to." She leaned in. Her kiss was slow, no hesitation, no apology, just presence. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead to his. "You didn't fix me, Callan. You just stayed long enough for me to fix myself." He brushed a thumb across her cheek. "And you let me be something I didn't know I could be. What a man." Someone wanted to stay. With Yike rolled up beside them, puppet in hand, and shoved herself between their laps. "Did you kiss again?" she asked. Ryan laughed softly. "Yes." Uyi giggled, then added, "Can you do it again when I'm not looking?" "Well, try," Ken said with agrin. The sun dipped lower, turning the walls gold outside. A breeze passed through the field. The wind was no longer cold, it just carried the sound of peace. At that night they ate together on the floor legs, tangled bowls and laps. Yala talked endlessly about the rabbit-like creatures she'd seen near the well. Ryan listened, eyes crinkling with real joy. Con refilled their water cups without being asked. Later, when the stars came out, Ryan laid her head on Callan's chest beneath the old sky glass panel of the roof. She traced a line across his ribs. "You're warm." He kissed the top of her head. "You're home." And for the first time in her memory, she believed it.